1.4 million adults identify as transgender in the United States. Transgender people face overwhelming obstacles every day, including discrimination, harassment, and violence, keeping them from living as their authentic selves. Trans people must battle every day for equal rights, respect, and inclusion. As more people openly identify as transgender and advocacy efforts increase, some of these obstacles are being scrutinized. However, much more work needs to be done for the trans community to live freely and free from violence. Today on Legally Speaking, we will talk with two LGBTQA advocates who will talk about the advocacy work and the ongoing obstacles this community faces and their efforts for equity. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Ashley Lowe, Chief Executive Officer of Lakeshore Legal Aid. We're a nonprofit law firm that provides free civil legal services to low-income people, seniors, and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault throughout Michigan. Today on Legally Speaking, we're talking with two advocates for the LGBTQ community, and we're going to be talking about transgender issues. So I'm so excited to have on our show Jay Kaplan. Jay has been the LGBTQ staff attorney at the ACLU since it was founded in 2001, since that project was founded. And he's done some amazing work, including challenging stings against gay men in public. He worked really hard to get gay marriage established and second parent adoptions. And he's been advocating for the rights of LGBTQ students at the high school level and the college level. So Jay, we're so grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ashley. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. And our other guest is Jeynce Poindexter. Jeynce, so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Jeynce is a nationally recognized advocate for LGBTQ community, including folks who are transgendered. She is a vice president of the Trans Sistas of Color. She was a co-chair of the Fair and Equal Initiative in Michigan, and she's a case manager at the Ruth Ellis Center. So, Jeynce, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to share space with you.
So I'd like to start, Jeynce, with you talking about what it means to be transgender. What does that definition mean, so that we're all on the same page? So can you talk about that? What is that definition, the common definition of transgender?
The common definition, and just the easiest way to just put it straightforward, is that I was biologically born a male, and I was assigned male at birth. That did not match up with my spirit and who I am on the inside. And so I decided to transition after long thought, and really it was a life-changing choice, actually, because before I was in turmoil, I was unhappy, I didn't know quite where I fit in the world, how to arrive. And it was years of confusion, and the choice to finalize and go ahead and go forth and just be my authentic self was one that was life-changing and saving for me. And so it's different journeys for all, but definitely, like I said, I was biologically assigned male. Now I present, live, and arrive through life as a female, and I'm okay with that. It's never a try to reach into doing too much. I know that biologically I'm not a woman, I cannot reproduce, but certainly I'm a lady, and certainly the way that I walk, thrive, and live and arrive through life is authentic with myself.
So thank you. Thank you for that really clear explanation. I know that people have some misperceptions. Like
Absolutely.
What are those things? What are those common things that people think about transgender that it's not?
I think that people automatically kind of lower me to sexual things. I think it instantly and immediately goes to choices in the bedroom, per se. Okay. Autonomy to my body. What have I done? What's going on? And what's the makeup of all of that? And I think it gets sensationalized more than you forget that I'm a person first. I'm someone's sibling. I'm someone's grandchild. I'm someone's, aunt, cousin, cousin. And so what I like to just bring it to is just the humanity in me. I'm a person. I pay taxes. I have a home. I have to maintain my health, and I have to watch my spending and my budgeting and what I consume within my grocery list as well. And so I always like to engage with people and just let them know that there's a lot of myths about us, particularly around the bathroom. I go to the bathroom and I use it just like everyone else. So, I don't want a certain set of rules or a certain set of policies designed for me. What I want is the equal access and opportunity to arrive, thrive, and live my life as I see fit, just as we were promised in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
So, Jeynce, I think you raised some really important issues about privacy, right? Like this, somehow people who are transgender, there's this idea that we have the right to know
Absolutely.
about their body, about what they're thinking,
Yes,
what their
ma'am.
plans are, right? That's not our business, and you get to live your life in the
Absolutely.
way
As
that you
long
choose
as
to.
we engage in a respectful and honorable way, and I treat you as you treat me, I don't think that there should be any difference or any wanting to know of things that I'm not privy to just automatically in your life.
Right, right. So let's talk about your life and your advocacy work. You're involved in a lot of things,
Yes, ma'am.
and you're doing a lot. I'm interested in what drove you to want to be an advocate and to talk about these issues so publicly.
What drove me to advocacy was real life experiences, lived experiences. Like a lot of LGBTQ people, my first sense of harm and harassment and discrimination came from within my own family. And so I was disconnected from my family very on around about 14, and I had to, I felt for me, in order to survive, that I had to do things and walk my own path. And so I did, and with God's grace and with Him keeping me the way that He did, because I never, even though I was going through so many things, I never separated from my love of Christ. And so that always kept me humble. It kept me understanding that life is bigger than me. And so all the things that I went through in the past helped me shape the tools to help others now. And so people ask, where's that heart of advocacy coming from? It was embedded in me. I have an undying, wavering spirit to survive, to make it, but also to pull people with me. And so that's advocacy 101. When you understand the importance of reaching back and helping to equip people, make it through and make life a little bit easier. And not just for LGBTQ people. I lend myself and my voice to a lot of different causes.
I think that language you're using about reaching back and pulling people along with you, right? It's not leading regardless of where they are, but it is pulling them along and bringing them into that.
Absolutely, and meeting them where they are. My help and the way I render services and render programming, it isn't in a judgmental state. That's not my position. When people reach out to me, they reach out to me because their back is against the wall, or because they're in a situation and they've come to a roadblock and they don't know what to do next. And I have to not only be able to listen, process, analyze, but also see where I can fit in. If it's outside of my wheelhouse, I need to know resources. So that's a connection piece. I have to keep my ear and myself to the streets, to the community in which I serve, in order to serve at the maximum ability.
So let's talk about some of those issues that cause people to reach out to you. There's some issues I think that are unique or uniquely different for the trans community. I'm thinking about homelessness first, right? Like I understand that 1 in 5 trans people will experience homelessness at some point in their life.
And that number is higher for trans people of color, particularly Black trans women, which I am.
Which is good to know. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
And so what is it? What causes that higher level of homelessness in the trans community?
There's so many different things that cause it. It's disconnection from families, being ostracized from support systems, so you may not have your documentation. And certainly if people don't value you and live in your authentic self, they aren't going to help you just a little bit further your path or your walk. And so there's a lot of emotions that that comes from the disconnection, hurt, pain, whatever it is. And so you have a whole generation of people that are stuck in survival mode. And survival mode pushes us to sex work. It pushes us to be creative about ways in which to survive, which the regular person kind of takes for granted because, you know, access, opportunity is easy and open to you. Me as a black trans woman, it's really easy for somebody to say, go get a job. Well, what does go get a job look like for me? If I'm sitting in front of a person who doesn't value me as a person, doesn't value what I bring, don't value my lived experience or my knowledge. And so that opportunity will not be open to me just because they found out who I am or what they think I represent, or back to those myths or, you know, just misunderstandings about trans people in general, but particularly trans women of color and black trans women.
So I would think too that with this huge problem of homelessness and maybe trans people who are in shelters, that seems like that would be a really dangerous situation.
It is. It is. I've actually had to reach out to Jay a couple of times for trans individuals who were mistreated in shelters. It is a very violent experience from what I've gathered through rendering supportive services and things. And so those are some dynamics that I remember. Because as case manager with the Ruth Ellis Center, I actually also head up a housing department, and we render supportive services to human traffic survivors. So LGBTQ plus you're a human traffic survivor. So can you imagine those intersections and what that trauma-informed care looks like and what the follow-up looks like, what secondary care for the family looks like. So it's just so many different dynamics that can add to those components of homelessness that people kind of take for granted.
So it's interesting that you raised the human trafficking. We did a show just a few weeks ago on human trafficking, and what I understand is that trans people are really not included in the research that's done around trafficking.
Nope.
So what harm does that cause? What's the problem with that?
Well, it causes harm because those resources that are allocated for that particular population, there's so many of people that they never reach that really need them. And so they're cut off from the statistics, they're cut off from even being represented on paper because of those reasons. And it goes back to discrimination, and if you don't value my being, why would you value taking stats on me?
Right, right. And I would imagine that sometimes the trans people are treated as criminals in the situation.
Just because I've had situations, I've faced my own situations where people have assumed and come to a position about me or about who I am or what I will or will not do. And I always like showing them different. Because I know that there's a spirit inside of me, and that's the Holy Spirit. When you asked, why do I do what I do, I've received instructions through my bishop, through the Lord, that I'm supposed to not only save people through my work, but I'm supposed to also show people, all of his people, the love inside of me that also resembles him, so that you know, if you can look at this person, this black trans woman who not only enters the room and owns the room, who is smart, articulate, beautiful, always presented nicely, always respectful and respected. If you can look at me and know that the Lord forgave me and he decided to use me, you know that he can do it for you too.
Thank you.
Yes,
for
ma'am.
sharing that. So I'd like to switch a little bit to the legal side of the trans issue.
Jay's
Yes, Jay, so Jay, you're up. So last year in 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court heard its first trans case about a trans woman from Michigan who was fired because she came out as trans. I know the ACLU was involved in that case. Can you talk about what the issues were in that case and what happened?
Sure. So yes, Amy Stevens was our client, and she contacted us. It was 8 years ago. She had, like other individuals, she had struggled with her gender identity. She was able to be out in her personal life, but not in her workplace. And so she summoned up the courage to inform her employer that she was a trans woman and that she would begin presenting as her authentic self at work. And his response was to fire her. And it was devastating economically, emotionally. This was her cause, working in the funeral home industry. And so she filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And she said that it was because of sex. It was sex discrimination. Because we know that gender identity is not explicitly covered by our state civil rights laws as well as our federal civil rights laws. And so, long story short, her case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And the court was deciding whether or not, when you discriminate against LGBT people, is it because of sex? And what the court held last year was yes, because you're based on one's sex assigned at birth, you're treating them differently than somebody also who's been assigned that same gender. And it's usually based on gender stereotypes. That's the impetus for discrimination against LGBT people. And so Amy was part of that historic case, and I don't want to give her short shrift because this was so meaningful to her to represent the transgender community, and this became almost a second cause for her, and it was very meaningful. Unfortunately, she passed away, I think, 6 weeks before the legal decision came down, but it was a historic decision, a 6-3 decision, and now LGBT employees across the United States have protections when they're discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or because of their gender identity.
That's wonderful. And there's a case coming that we're watching now in the Michigan Supreme Court, right?
Yes.
And is it about how Michigan's civil rights laws protect LGBTQ?
Right. So I think Michigan is one of the first higher courts that's looking at that Bostock decision, the Supreme Court decision from last year, and they're applying it to our state civil rights laws. Does this mean that our civil rights law that prohibits not only discrimination in employment, but housing and education and public accommodations, does that also cover LGBT people? I mean, it's the same analogy. When you discriminate against a transgender person in housing, you're doing it because of sex. When you do it in education, it's because of sex. So Michigan could be one of the first states to apply this U.S. Supreme Court decision to their civil rights laws and find that LGBT people have those protections against discrimination in all those areas, which would be pretty wonderful.
And so are those the same issues that were raised in the Fair and Equal initiative that you were working on, Jeynce?
Absolutely. So our main goal was to get this Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act amended to cover sexual orientation and gender identity, which would eliminate possibly not all levels of discrimination or harm, but it would really blanket out a little bit further than how it is now, nationally and locally. At this point, like Jay said, that decision to marry, the decision that came down with Amy Stevens' case, a lot of people take for granted that, oh, the community, I've literally heard conversations, oh, well, they have the right to do this, they can do that now, blah, blah, blah. But like Jay said, it did not speak to public accommodation. It did not speak to education. It did not speak to health care. What does comprehensive health care look like for me, a person who's paying into an entity every time out of my check, and then I bump into a doctor who says, you know what, I don't think you need comprehensive care. As a matter of fact, I can't even care for you at all. It's pretty painful. And so those protections up under law would really help to avoid things like that. And also hate crimes. People think of hate crimes just to LGBTQ people, but the Ahmaud Arbery case, Michigan is just like Georgia. And so that can very well happen here. And people need to really understand the true dynamics of all of these things, is that it's not just about a gay agenda or LGBTQ agenda. It's about finally making equitable investments into all our legislation to speak and represent us all.
I think part of the problem, too, is for the past 30 years, legislation has been introduced that would amend Elliott Larson, but the legislative leadership will not let those bills even move forward to even get a committee hearing. So the ballot initiative was another mechanism to try to take it directly to the voters. Unfortunately, they were not able to get the requisite number of signatures, but that's still not off the plate for LGBT rights. The court case, the Rauch World case, is one way to achieve those civil rights, but it's always best to have it in the statute explicitly.
Right. So it's in a more secure position.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there have been some successes recently in the rules that have applied to trans people. Thinking specifically about the birth certificates, and
Yeah.
my understanding is there was a rule that required surgery
Yes.
before someone could change their gender on their birth certificate.
Right.
But that rule has been changed.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, can you talk about, either of you, talk about why that rule was in place and why it was so harmful?
Yeah.
Well, I'll let Jay take care of that, the first part. Because fortunately, we've been able to work on really actively participating in these policy rewrites and wording and phrasing. And so I'll let Jay kind of take on the legal realm, and then I'll do the kind of human aspect of it for population.
So it's in a statute, and the law has to change. It requires surgery. And as Jeynce mentioned, misperceptions about transgender people that it only centers around surgery. Not all transgender people choose to, want to, can have surgery. That's not what defines who they are. And so the legislation was introduced. Once again, our legislative leadership would not allow it to even move forward. And so there was a question about the constitutionality of that. Nobody else, in order to get an accurate birth certificate, has to undergo invasive surgery, which they might not choose to do so, in order to get that birth certificate. So a request was made to our Attorney General about the constitutionality of that provision. And a group of LGBT organizations, of which Jeynce was involved, we all submitted a letter, kind of an amicus letter, to the Attorney General, urging her to find that requirement unconstitutional. And so she did. And so it's not enforceable with the Department of Vital Records anymore. Now there's a new form. You can self-attest as to what your gender identity is. And not only on the birth certificate is it for male and female, but there's also the option for those who identify as gender non-binary. So this is a huge step forward that we couldn't achieve, once again, at this point in time legislatively.
Absolutely. We also achieved, a couple of weeks ago, we were able to work with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson to introduce the third identifier for gender nonconforming or gender non-binary folks, and how they identify and how they will be represented in our history, on our identification, how that just warmed my heart to be able to do that. And then in 2019, we also worked with Secretary Benson to also introduce new policy around the gender markers. So any trans person in the state of Michigan right now can go to a Secretary of State with $10, request that their gender marker align with how they present and how they authentically arrive through life, and it's no questions asked, right then and there, it must be done. That's huge, and that will benefit and include generations to come, and it's wonderful to continue to be able to be a part of such work, especially with my friend.
Oh, same here, same here. We used to have one of the most restrictive policies to get an accurate license and ID. It had to be in accordance with what was on your birth certificate. So of course it left out probably 2/3 of the transgender residents in the state of Michigan. And we actually sued the state of Michigan and under previous administration for their, they were unwilling to change the policy, and then eventually we've evolved to this. So we really have, I think at that meeting, Jeynce, with the Secretary of State's office, they said that Michigan is now one of the leading states
I think
for
we're like
the ability to get
22 or 23rd or something like that. But really happy again to be kind of heading in the right direction and pulling the rest of the country with us.
Yes.
Our leadership is wonderful in that regard. We really do have some powerful, progressive, and really thoughtful leaders in the state of Michigan right now.
Absolutely. So let's talk about where people can go if they need help.
Absolutely.
If somebody is in the trans community and is feeling threatened or unsafe, what can they do to get help?
I happen to be the Vice President of Trans Sistas of Color Project. Trans Sistas of Color Project was started over 11 years ago because of the murder, harm, and discrimination against trans women, particularly trans women of color and Black trans women here in the Detroit and metropolitan area. They can definitely reach out to us. I also happen to be a case case manager for the Ruth Ellis Center, where we set to curate and create safe spaces for LGBTQ youth and to also let them be in charge of what that looks like for their lives. And so we're always happy to help out in some way. We have behavioral health, we have a housing department, we have a drop-in center. So we've really been comprehensive about everything that the community needs. We're also building a transitional housing complex on Claremont and Woodward that we're very proud of. We got support from Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, also State Senator Adam Ollier. And so we're just happy to continue to keep forging and be a resource in the community. Also, I reach out to Jay a lot. You know, there's a lot of things that people may be getting denied for, procedures or being treated unfairly. Jay is a real strong resource that I lean on a lot personally and professionally.
And we all do.
It's a mutual thing. It's
Oh,
a mutual
absolutely.
thing.
Well, I want to thank you both so much, Jeynce and Jay, for the incredible work that you're doing and your advocacy, and I wish you all the best.
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you all for joining us on Legally Speaking.